Good morning, you're watching AnewZ. I'm Dilek Tuna. Here are the top stories. US President Donald Trump signs a travel ban on nationals from 12 countries and restrictions on 7 others. The European Commission and ECB approve Bulgaria's adoption of the euro currency next year. ACWA Power is to invest nearly $2 billion in large-scale solar energy infrastructure across Türkiye. The United States has announced new travel restrictions under a proclamation signed by President Donald Trump, citing national security concerns. The order fully bars entry from several countries and partially restricts travel from others, while also targeting certain academic and exchange programs.
US President Donald Trump has signed a proclamation that prevents people from certain countries from entering the United States. The proclamation fully restricts the entry of nationals from 12 countries, including Afghanistan, Iran and Sudan, citing national security concerns.
In the 21st century, we've seen one terror attack after another carried out by foreign visa overstayers from dangerous places all over the world. And thanks to Biden's open door policies, today there are millions and millions of these illegals who should not be in our country.
According to the White House, the countries facing a total ban were found to be deficient with regards to screening and vetting and determined to pose a very high risk to the United States. The proclamation also partially restricted travel to the United States by nationals from 7 other countries, including Venezuela, Burundi and Cuba. Venezuela reacted to the proclamation, with officials warning against traveling to the United States.
Honestly, being in the US is a big risk for anyone, not just Venezuelans. If you're really that foolish, then go to the United States. Take your vacation days and go to the US. In the United States, the workforce is made up of migrants from all over the world who are there.
In addition to travel restrictions, the US president also signed a proclamation to suspend US entry of foreign nationals seeking to study or participate in exchange programs at Harvard University. The order also directs the US State Department to consider revoking existing academic or exchange visas of any current Harvard students who meet the proclamation's criteria. Harvard University has denounced Trump's executive order, calling it an illegal and retaliatory step taken by the Trump administration in violation of Harvard's First Amendment rights.
Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed retaliation for Ukraine's weekend strikes on Russian air bases during a phone call with US President Donald Trump. Trump wrote on his Truth social media that he spoke to Putin for over an hour, describing the call as a good conversation, adding it's not one that brings immediate peace. The two also discussed Iran, with Putin suggesting he could help with nuclear talks with Tehran. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed Russia's peace memorandum presented at the Istanbul talks on Monday as an ultimatum and suggested a temporary truce until a leaders' summit can be arranged. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin accused Kyiv of terrorism.
Ukraine and Russia recently exchanged proposals, but remain divided on ceasefire terms and a possible leaders' meeting. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says that Moscow should not fall for what he called Ukraine's criminal provocations. He said Russia should use both negotiations and military means to achieve its goals in Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin later said, "I agree with this." Putin also accused Ukraine of carrying out attacks on bridges in Russia's Bryansk and Kursk regions, calling them acts of terrorism aimed at disrupting the peace talks. Russia's lead negotiator, Vladimir Medinsky, said Ukraine proposed a 30 to 60-day ceasefire to prepare for a potential meeting between the two presidents. Medinsky added that Russia conveyed President Putin's view that a leaders' summit is possible, but only if properly prepared. He also confirmed that Russia is ready to start a prisoner exchange between June 7th and 9th, offering to transfer 500 people. However, no name lists have been exchanged yet. In Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected the Russian ceasefire memorandum, calling it an ultimatum. He said the proposals were unacceptable and that continuing talks in Istanbul without real decisions is pointless. Zelensky added that Ukraine is ready for a meeting with Putin at any time and proposed a ceasefire to help prepare for such a summit. He also said international monitoring of the truce could be discussed and that Ukraine would appreciate support for the idea from US President Donald Trump. Putin commented on ceasefire proposals, saying that any ceasefire would likely be used by Ukraine to bring in more weapons from the West. Meanwhile, Germany is stressing unity with Ukraine and the need to pursue diplomacy. Germany's foreign minister said that Chancellor Friedrich Merz will tell US President Donald Trump during his upcoming visit that Europe stands firmly with Ukraine and that no chance for peace should be missed. Germany also added that Russia's military success in Ukraine was never expected and stated clearly Russia will fail.
Following the second round of direct Russia-Ukraine peace talks, the two sides are organising the agreed swap of bodies of killed soldiers and the exchange of prisoners. A ceasefire, however, remains elusive.
A new round of direct peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, held in Istanbul on June 2nd, ended with little progress. The only tangible results were agreements to exchange more prisoners of war and return the bodies of fallen soldiers. The negotiations, lasting just over an hour, marked only the second such meeting since March 2022. Ukraine, led by Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, pushed for a full, unconditional 30-day ceasefire across land, sea and air. Kyiv said its proposal had been submitted in advance, but Moscow presented its plan only at the meeting. Russia, represented by Putin's aide Vladimir Medinsky, rejected a full ceasefire and instead proposed a limited 2- or 3-day truce in unspecified areas. Still, both sides agreed to exchange all sick and seriously wounded prisoners, as well as those under 25. They also committed to returning the bodies of around 12,000 soldiers. Russia said it would begin by handing over 6,000 Ukrainian remains next week. Zelensky confirmed Ukraine would reciprocate with 6,000 Russian bodies, though no timeline was given. Beyond these humanitarian gestures, political divisions remain deep. Russia continues to demand Ukraine's withdrawal from 4 partly occupied regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, and recognition of their annexation, along with Crimea. Moscow also wants Ukraine to abandon NATO aspirations, declare neutrality, limit its armed forces, lift sanctions, and grant Russian official language status. A Russian memorandum also calls for Ukraine to halt mobilization, freeze Western arms deliveries, stop troop redeployments, and ban foreign military presence, steps Moscow says are necessary before any peace treaty. It further proposes ending martial law and holding elections.
Clearly deny all these Russian conditions. It say only unconditional ceasefire, which means that Ukraine is going to exactly to do this. Full armament and full mobilization and implementation of French and British troops on Ukrainian territory. That's why it's deadlock. This negotiation, from my point of view, more personal show for President Donald Trump. Both sides interesting that Donald Trump accused opposite side for the collapse of the peace deal.
Ukraine dismissed these conditions as unacceptable and tantamount to surrender. Deputy Foreign Minister Serhiy Kislitsa stressed Kyiv would not compromise its sovereignty. A Ukrainian expert we spoke to outlined the core contradictions between the Russian and Ukrainian proposals presented in Istanbul.
The contradiction is that Russia wants Ukraine to surrender and Ukraine wants to be independent, sovereign country, democratic sovereign country. That's the biggest contradiction. Russia put on the table requests that says that Ukraine has to give away 4 oblasts. The including the parts Russia doesn't occupy today. They have to Ukraine has to demilitarize, has to lead denazification, whatever it means in the Russian President Putin had. So they did not put any kind of a plan that could be even looked seriously at. They just put the plan of surrender that they want to have it right now, what they want to have right now. Ukraine doesn't have a choice but to be a shield at this point to the rest of the Europe. So what I make out of all this proposal of so-called agreement is that Russia is stalling time. They are not willing to have any kind of peace talk, negotiations, or anything like that.
Ukraine also presented a list of 400 children it says were taken to Russia. Zelensky said Moscow agreed to return only 10. Russia maintains the children were evacuated from war zones. While Russia claims to seek a lasting resolution, Kyiv accuses it of using diplomacy to buy time. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has warned the US may abandon mediation efforts if there's no sign of real progress. Ukraine expects a Russian response to its ceasefire proposal by the end of June, but prospects for a direct Zelensky-Putin summit remain slim.
Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has described the latest Russia-Ukraine talks in Istanbul as sobering, accusing Moscow of offering only its usual hardline demands. Speaking alongside his Polish counterpart, Wadephul said Russia showed no real willingness to engage in peace efforts. Germany is now pushing for an 18th package of EU sanctions, urging coordination with the United States. Wadephul urged seizing every chance for peace, saying Europe expects action to bring Russia to the table. Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski accused Russia of stalling and intensifying attacks, urging continued Western military support for Ukraine. The European Commission and the European Central Bank on Wednesday confirmed that Bulgaria meets all the criteria to join the Eurozone by January the 1st, 2026. This decision, pending final approval from EU finance ministers, would make Bulgaria the 21st country to adopt the euro.
Hope and fear are clashing in Bulgaria as the country prepares to join the Eurozone. With the green light from Brussels, Bulgaria is set to adopt the euro in January 2026. The country hopes for smoother trade flows and a seat at the ECB's governing council. For businesses, adopting the euro is expected to streamline transactions, reduce currency exchange risks, and position Bulgaria as a more attractive destination for tourists.
I expect a growth in the business, especially after entering the Eurozone, because it will be much easier for everyone within the Eurozone to understand our value, to understand our offerings, and to understand that Bulgaria is one of the most attractive countries for winter and for summer vacation.
But across Bulgaria, public opinion is deeply divided. A recent Eurobarometer poll showed that half the population opposes adopting the euro, fearing price hikes and economic instability. There are widespread concerns that the currency switch could trigger price increases, as seen in other countries during euro transitions in recent years.
It's hard to see it as something positive, because we are an impoverished country. We have become not a third world country, but a fourth world country.
Trust in institutions is low after 4 years of political instability, weak coalitions, and repeated snap elections. Concerns are strongest in rural areas where the average monthly income is below the national average of 2,443 lira, or roughly $1,420.
People in rural areas, especially elderly people, they are at higher risk. Not so much of the prices itself. Again, we have a very competitive retail market, but I think that elderly people are at risk at the moment of the change of the currency, especially those that have their savings in their own homes, money in cash.
With elections behind and Eurozone entry ahead, Bulgaria faces a delicate transition where hopes for economic growth are shadowed by the fears of those who feel left behind.
As global conflicts intensify, commercial aviation is navigating an increasingly hazardous and expensive sky. From drone threats to airspace shutdowns, airlines are being forced to make tough calls that impact routes, costs, and passenger safety.
Conflict zones are increasingly disrupting global aviation, with airline executives warning of rising operational costs, airspace restrictions, and safety threats from missiles, drones, and GPS spoofing. According to Reuters, airlines face growing losses from cancelled flights and costly rerouting, often on short notice. Airspace closures over Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East, India, Pakistan, and parts of Africa have left fewer viable flight paths. Compared to 5 years ago, more than half the countries on a Europe-Asia route now need careful review, said OPS Group's Mark Z. Since October 2023, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has brought drones and missiles dangerously close to major routes. Russian airports, including Moscow, regularly shut down due to drone threats, while GPS jamming is surging near conflict areas. India and Pakistan recently closed airspace to each other's carriers amid hostilities. The worst risk is a civilian aircraft being shot down. In December, a Russian missile downed an Azerbaijan Airlines plane that crashed in Kazakhstan, killing 38 people. In October, a cargo plane was shot in Sudan, killing 5. 6 commercial planes have been downed since 2001, with 3 near misses. International Air Transport Association's Willie Walsh called for better information sharing among governments to ensure civil aviation safety. Though accident rates are down, these figures exclude war-related incidents. Each airline navigates this threat landscape differently, relying on a mix of government advisories and internal assessments. Since 2022, Western airlines avoiding Russian airspace face higher costs, while others like China and India benefit from shorter routes. Singapore Airlines Amsterdam-bound SQ326 has taken 3 different paths in just over a year, through Afghanistan, Iraq, and now avoiding Pakistan, as conflict zones shift. Pilots are also concerned. IATA says airlines should judge flight safety, but history shows commercial pressure can distort decisions, warned pilot rep Paul Reuter. Crews can refuse flights over conflict zones, and most airlines respect that.
The United States on Wednesday vetoed a UN Security Council resolution demanding an immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, along with unhindered humanitarian aid access. The draft, backed by 14 of the 15 Council members, was blocked by the US, which argued the measure failed to condemn Hamas or require the group to disarm and leave Gaza. According to acting US Ambassador to the UN, Dorothy Shear, this resolution would undermine diplomatic efforts to reach a ceasefire that reflects the realities on the ground and embolden Hamas. Israel has also rejected calls for an unconditional or lasting ceasefire, insisting Hamas must not remain in control of Gaza.
Rather than push forward a resolution,
Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara is set to visit the United States in September and deliver a speech at the UN, according to Syrian outlets. This would mark the first trip by a Syrian official to the country in 6 decades. The news of the visit comes just weeks after US President Donald Trump announced the end of American sanctions on Damascus. Previously, we discussed the recent reports that Syrian President al-Shara is planning to visit the US in September with John Kovalich, a senior editor at Issue Insight. John said, what is the importance of this visit for Syria, Middle East region, US and the EU?
It's incredibly important, primarily because it will physically place the president of Syria at the UN podium during the General Assembly. He will then be able to take his seat at the table where the Syrian delegation would sit and listen to the speeches of heads of state and heads of government. Most importantly, though, will be the fact that he will be able to be seen with President Erdogan of Turkey, with Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, with the Iraq, or with the Qataris, with the UAEs. He'll be seen with all those people as they'll basically be shepherding him in. And then it also makes much easier for other heads of state and government, particularly in Europe, to use the opportunity for pull-asides and bilaterals. So it's very, very important. Well, during the next 3 months, it's full of opportunity, but also challenges. Because in some respects, there's a clock that now has begun ticking until mid-September when he speaks. And that clock is about, what does Syria look like today? And what's it going to look like in 90 days? So he's got work to do, because he needs to continually show, leading up to the UN General Assembly, that Syria is changing. One of the big challenges, though, for him is going to be, there are people in Syria who don't want these changes to be successful, who don't want him to be successful, who want Iranian influence to return to Syria, and simply don't want the type of government that they feel he's creating. So he's going to have to manage that. But it's the optics that are going to be incredibly important. And his speech, he will be able to say, he may do something dramatic, that now is the time for Israel, the state of Israel and Syria, to reconnect, to establish formal diplomatic relations. He may also say, as a message to Israel, as a message to Turkey, this is a time for countries to leave the territory of Syria. This is a time for our boundaries to again be our own. So he's got, like I said, a lot of opportunities, challenges, but it's simply the optics of him showing up, which is going to be incredibly powerful.
A new investigation by The Insider reveals how Russia's military intelligence, the GRU unit 29155, orchestrated a disinformation operation using forged leaks, fake personas and international journalists, with Azerbaijan cast as the villain. And now, nearly 8 years later, the truth is beginning to unravel.
In 2017, headlines in Bulgaria and beyond accused Azerbaijan of secretly delivering weapons to Syrian terrorists aboard diplomatic flights. The story, pushed by Bulgarian journalist Dilyana Gaitangieva, sparked outrage. Her report claimed that 350 Silkway Airlines flights, protected by diplomatic immunity, were carrying arms to war zones, from Syria and Afghanistan to Africa. Dilyana's so-called exclusive quickly gained traction. Shared by WikiLeaks, amplified by Julian Assange, and promoted by pro-Russian voices, it seemed to expose a vast covert network involving Western intelligence, Gulf states, and Azerbaijan. But it was all a lie, or more precisely, a Russian operation. In 2025, an investigation by The Insider, authored by Roman Dobrokotov, Christo Grozev, and Michael Weiss, traced the original leak to GRU Unit 29155, the same Russian military unit linked to poisonings, sabotage plots, and global subversion. The fake whistleblower behind the leak, a fabricated persona on Twitter at @anon_BG, created by the GRU.
What we discovered was truly shocking. It turned out that over the years, many of the disinformation operations that had previously been attributed to other parts of the GRU, or even to the FSB and the Foreign Intelligence Service, had in fact been carried out by this same unit. A significant number of their disinformation campaigns had been designed to cover their tracks, covering up assassination attempts, sabotage operations, and actual killings or explosions.
goal: discredit NATO allies, stir anti-Western sentiment, and frame Azerbaijan as a tool of the West in Syria's war. The documents were sent to Diliana via this fake GRU account. The Silkway story was a masterpiece of Russian disinformation.
There is a clear correlation between what they do on the ground, attempted murders, real assassinations or bombings, and what they do in the cyber and disinformation sphere. It has also become clear that many journalists around the world who work with them know exactly who they're working for. Others might not know at the beginning, but eventually they either figure it out or are told directly.
The documents, flight records, diplomatic notes, and weapons manifests were later found to be either forged or selectively edited. GRU successfully injected fake stories into Western media via intermediaries like Gaitanjeva, who published the Silkway airline story in Bulgarian newspaper Trud. Russian state media amplified the claims, and Azerbaijan's reputation took the hit.
There is one journalist for whom we gathered enough evidence to name her explicitly in our report, Diliana Gaitanjeva. Personally, it was very difficult for me to include her name, because over the years, yes, we've had online conflicts, and I've disagreed with the conclusions she's drawn, and the platforms where she's published her so-called investigations, but I always assumed that her motivation was ideological. It turns out it was not. It turns out she has in fact worked for what is probably the most terrifying department within Russian intelligence, one composed entirely of killers, people whose mission is to eliminate opposition figures, so-called traitors, and global competitors of the Kremlin.
The operation's reach extended beyond print. In 2017, WikiLeaks shared her interview, calling her firing pathetic. Assange himself publicly defended her, repeating claims that Western powers and Saudi Arabia were secretly fueling jihadist violence. Now, analysts say WikiLeaks became an amplifier for GRU propaganda, knowingly or not. The entire narrative was built on disinformation. There was no verified evidence that Azerbaijan violated arms control treaties. In fact, the accusations served Moscow's broader strategy: divide NATO, discredit their partners in the Caucasus, and shift blame for Syria's chaos away from the Kremlin and its ally, Bashar al-Assad. After her dismissal, she began cooperating with pro-Kremlin media, participated in events sponsored by the Russian Ministry of Defense, and actively promoted other conspiracy theories, including those about biolabs in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine's intelligence service SBU flagged Gaitanjeva as a probable GRU asset. In 2023, her name was listed in the Ukrainian Mirotvorets database. Critics in Bulgaria say their government ignored Ukrainian warnings.
Her relationship with this GRU unit dates back to before 2017. We can't pinpoint exactly when it began. All we know is that formal contact between representatives of the unit and Gaitanjeva herself took place via a private Twitter chat in June 2017. And by that point, their relationship had already been ongoing for at least a year. I believe that these ties may have since ended, as we've seen no communication over the past year between her and members of the unit.
In the years that followed, GRU's fingerprints showed up across Europe in poisonings, sabotage, cyber attacks. But this case, the Silkway Airlines hoax, reveals something more subtle. Not just a bullet, but a narrative. Not a bomb, but a story, told with forged emails, fake leaks, and real journalists. And Azerbaijan? Just collateral damage in Russia's disinformation war, or something more deliberate? The headlines may have faded, but the scars of disinformation remain. For journalists, it's a cautionary tale. For states like Azerbaijan, a lesson in information warfare. And for the world, a reminder: not all propaganda screams. Some whispers in footnotes, tweets, and forged flight logs.
Polluted rivers from Armenia are flowing into the Araz River, putting Azerbaijan's environment at serious risk, according to Sabit Barigov of the Environmental Protection First NGO coalition. Speaking at a press briefing on Armenia's Metsamor nuclear power plant, he said Iran also raised concerns about the pollution earlier this year. Bakirov added that the entire territory of Azerbaijan could be affected and called on media and international organisations to pay attention to the issue. He also spoke on an initiative put forward by 33 Turkish organisations, saying it shows that Armenia's activities are causing concern in Turkey and Iran as well. According to him, more than 900 mining enterprises operate in Armenia, including 24 that extract precious metals. Tbilisi is shutting down its NATO and EU information centre, according to Georgia's foreign ministry. The centre, established in 2005 to promote Euro-Atlantic integration, will be merged into the ministry as part of a reorganisation. Some staff have already been told they'll be dismissed. The move comes amid growing tensions between Georgia and the West. While Georgia remains an EU candidate, the ruling Georgian Dream Party has paused accession talks until 2028 and faces criticism for adopting laws seen as pro-Russian. Georgia has launched its first modern dry port near Tbilisi, aiming to boost trade and strengthen its role as a regional transit hub. Our correspondent, Nini Nikolashvili, has more from Tbilisi.
Georgia has officially launched the Tbilisi Dry Port project, the first modern rail-based container and freight terminal in the region. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze announced its opening, calling it a major step in strengthening trade across the Caucasus and Central Asia. The dry port is being built in 3 phases, covering 28.5 hectares. The first phase, already completed, will handle 100,000 containers annually. Once they're fully completed, the capacity will double to 200,000 containers. Located near Azerbaijan, Armenia and Tbilisi International Airport with direct links to highways and national railways, the port is expected to become one of the most efficient logistic centers in the region. It will serve not only Georgian port cities like Batumi, Poti or Plain-Dana Port, but as a hub for international shipping, especially for cargoes coming from China and Far East via the Middle Corridor. The project is a partnership of the United Arab Emirates Abu Dhabi Port Group, Norway's Wilhelmsman Port Services and local company Inveco. According to the Prime Minister, Tbilisi Dry Port will boost Georgia's connectivity, strengthen its transit role and support economic growth while turning the country into a key regional hub. It's Nini Nikolashvili reporting from Tbilisi, AnewZ.
Saudi Arabia is deepening its energy investment footprint in Türkiye. ACWA Power, a leading developer of power and water projects based in Riyadh, is preparing to invest nearly $2 billion in large-scale solar energy infrastructure across the country.
ACWA Power is in the final stages of signing agreements to establish a total of 2 gigawatts of solar power capacity in Türkiye, a transformative initiative that will see the construction of 2 1-gigawatt solar power plants in the central Anatolian provinces of Sivas and Karaman. This investment, valued at approximately $2 billion, will be carried out under a government-to-government model, a framework successfully used in Turkey's past mega projects, including the ACWA nuclear power plant and the Trans-Anatolian natural gas pipeline. The model, backed by special legislation, allows for streamlined procedures such as zoning permits, land acquisition, and technical approvals, significantly reducing bureaucratic delays. Analysts say this will enable fast-tracked project development, a key factor in Turkey's quest to become a regional leader in clean energy. ACWA Power, which operates in over a dozen countries, is already a major player in global renewable energy markets. The company's entry into Turkey marks a significant pivot toward deepening energy diplomacy between Riyadh and Ankara, as both nations seek to diversify their economies and reduce reliance on fossil fuels. While ACWA Power initially proposed importing solar panels and technical equipment from China, negotiations led to an agreement on local content requirements. This means that Turkey-based manufacturers will now play a key role in supplying components for the new solar plants. Industry insiders confirmed that ACWA Power has already requested proposals from Turkish manufacturers for equipment and part production, a move that could invigorate Turkey's domestic solar manufacturing and create hundreds of jobs. Experts suggest that this project aligns with Turkey's strategic goals under its national energy and mining policy, which aims to boost the share of renewables in electricity generation to over 50% by 2035.
These were the updates for the hour. Stay tuned on AnewZ for more updates throughout the day.